All right, why don't we get started? Good morning. Welcome to the Arizona Capital Times Morning Scoop. I'm Gary Grado, Executive Editor of the Arizona Capital Times, and today we're going to talk about what's next for abortion access in Arizona. As you learned today, the Arizona legislature has passed a bevy of laws over the years that restricted abortion in various ways. Some of them passed constitutional muster, while others did not. And now with the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson, which held that the U.S. Constitution does not confer a right to abortion and return the authority to regulate abortion to the states, Arizona is in the process of deciding which state law will control. Either a 15-week ban on abortion, which passed this year, or a near total abortion ban that was enacted well before Arizona became a state. The only exception to that law is the life of the patient is if the life of the patient is in danger. So however the conflict plays out, there will be a seismic shift, and that's some of what our panel will discuss today. But we wouldn't be having this discussion today in this forum without our sponsor, NARAL Pro-Choice America, which for over 50 years, has fought to protect and advance reproductive freedom at the federal and state levels, including access to leave, access to abortion care, birth control, pregnancy and postpartum care, and paid family leave for everybody. And now with us today is Caroline Mello Roberson, the Southwest Regional Director for NARAL Pro-Choice America, to give us some introductory remarks. Good morning, Caroline.
Good morning, Gary. Thank you. And thank you for allowing us to sponsor this panel. As you said, I'm Caroline Mello Roberson. I'm the Southwest Regional Director for NARAL Pro-Choice America and our Arizona chapter, NARAL Pro-Choice Arizona. NARAL is a nonprofit advocacy organization that supports reproductive freedom through political, community, and legislative organizing. We have more than 75,000 members across the state of Arizona. As you alluded to, abortion access in Arizona has been under attack for decades, but this year the stakes are higher than ever. Thanks to the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade and ending the constitutional right to abortion as we know it, allowing states to pass total bans on abortion, reproductive freedom is in a crisis like it never has been before. Already, Arizonans have severely restricted access to abortion, including a 24-hour waiting period, mandatory ultrasound, 3 different reasons that folks can't seek abortion care, and medically unnecessary restrictions on medication abortion. In a few short weeks, as Gary mentioned, a law will be in effect that will ban abortion at 15 weeks without exceptions for the pregnant person's circumstances. In addition to this draconian ban, as Arizona Attorney General Mark Brunovich is attempting to bring back a total ban on abortion because of a law signed in 1864 before Arizona was officially a state. Our partners at Planned Parenthood are currently fighting this in the courts to block this total ban from going into effect, and we expect a decision later this month. Because of these laws, providers and folks seeking care in Arizona do not have clarity on the current legal status of abortion care, causing confusion and scaring some folks into not seeking the care that they need. This confusion is the point, and mega Republicans in Arizona are playing politics with our health and our families. That's why NARAL sponsored this panel today, so you can hear from providers, lobbyists, and lawyers about the future of abortion access in Arizona. States matter when it comes to your reproductive freedom, now more than ever. Polling has shown that abortion access will be a major voter driver in the midterm elections. The Arizona legislature is currently controlled by a razor-thin anti-choice Republican majority. We have a chance to flip that, to get a new governor and a new attorney general this year. That's exciting. Thank you to the Capital Times for allowing us to sponsor this panel. If any of you would like to learn more about NARAL and how you can help us out, you can visit our website at prochoiceamerica.org and click Take Action to sign up as a NARAL member. Thank you so much, Gary. Back to you.
Thank you, Caroline. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Jodi Liggett. She's a proud native Arizonan and fierce woman's advocate. She's a policy expert, a public policy expert, and she has worked in both Republican and Democratic administrations and the nonprofit and private sectors. Jodi began her career at the Arizona State House of Representatives as Republican committee staff, but soon moved to the governor's office of Jane D. Hall as her policy advisor for human services for the duration of Hull's administration. After lobbying for private companies, she settled at the Arizona Foundation for Women, moving from director of policy to CEO. After 7 years at AFW, she joined Phoenix City government as Phoenix Greg Stanton's senior policy advisor And when the opportunity arose to join the Planned Parenthood team, it was too good to pass up. And she spent 6 years there as the executive director of Planned Parenthood Advocates AZ, the organization's electoral arm, and as vice president of external affairs for the medical side of the organization. Most recently, Jodi was Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego's deputy chief of staff. And she's now incubating a women's issues think tank and advocacy group, the Arizona Center for Women's Advancement. Jodi holds a bachelor's degree in political science and a law degree, both from ASU. Good morning, Jodi, and welcome.
Good morning, all.
So next we have Jared Keenan. Jared is the legal director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Arizona. After graduating from Boston University School of Law, Jared worked as a public defender in Boston and in Mojave and Yavapai counties in Arizona before joining the ACLU of Arizona. As a public defender, Jared represented people charged with serious felony offenses, including capital murder. He also represented criminal defendants on appeal and post-conviction relief proceedings and through special actions, arguing several times before the Arizona Court of Appeals and the Arizona Supreme Court. When he joined the ACLU of Arizona, Jared continued to work on criminal law reform in the state through advocacy and litigation, focusing on prisoners' rights, prosecutor transparency and accountability, and reform to Arizona's criminal code and rules. As legal director, Jared oversees the litigation docket of the ACLU of Arizona, including litigation protecting abortion access in the state. Good morning, Jared. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And also joining us is Dr. DeShawn Taylor, MD. Dr. Taylor is a gynecologist and family planning specialist, gender-affirming care provider, and reproductive justice advocate who established Desert Star Family Planning Clinic in Phoenix in 2013 and founded Desert Star Institute for Family Planning, a nonprofit organization for which she's president in 2017. Recognized by the Maricopa County NAACP as a trailblazer and most recently as a champion of choice by the National Institute for Reproductive Health, Dr. Taylor works to advance access to reproductive health care for people through service provision, education and training, and advocacy and thought leadership. Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for joining us. And
Looking forward to a great discussion.
And our fourth panelist is Eva Burch. Eva is a nurse practitioner who has practiced in the areas of mental health care and women's health care. Eva is also running for the Senate in the State Senate in Legislative District 9. Good morning, Eva.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Now, before we begin, I'd like to remind our audience that the chat is open and to please submit your questions, and I'll try to get to as many as time allows. And I also want to say that the Arizona Capital Times does not take a stance on today's subject, and all comments and opinions expressed are those of the panelists. So I'd like to start the conversation with Jodi. So your experience goes back to before Jane Hall was governor in the late 90s, early 2000s. Can you give us a brief summary of the legislative record on access to abortion and the fight that has ensued over the years, and tell us about the laws that are on the books now?
Well, it's been quite a journey, I would say, over the last 25 years. When I talk to folks now referring to those Hall days, that's when folks were allowed to be pro-choice Republicans, kind of, right? There was much more moderation. There was, in fact, a middle at the legislature and in other elected positions, but that changed. We had the Casey decision in the late 90s, which modified Roe and really allowed states to start regulating abortion as a medical practice. And what we saw was conservative legislatures across the country using that as it turned out to be giant loophole to really enact these regulations around abortion clinics that are excessive, and regulations around the medical care that occurs in them completely excessive. Caroline gave some examples earlier, but these TRAP laws, targeted regulation of abortion providers, do things like have waiting periods, which are unnecessary and paternal in our view at NARAL. People make their decisions in their own time. We don't need state mandated waiting periods. Physician only requirements, in-person consultation requirements, required scripts that very often are medically inaccurate that physicians are forced to read to their patients. I could go on and on. This is not at all about patient safety. If that were true, in fact, some of these laws would not be on the books because they delay care and they deliver inaccurate information. So it's not about patient safety. It's about interfering with the delivery of care, making it so difficult to access that people give up and so difficult to provide that doctors and physicians quit providing. So, and Arizona is, has been a pioneer, unfortunately, in this area. And we have some of the most restrictive laws on the books. So even in the absence of Roe and the subsequent decisions, and we've now got a patchwork situation across the country, Arizona's got a ton of regulations around abortion, even if it turns out to be legal up to 15 weeks. So we have a lot to do to dismantle those medically unnecessary restrictions.
All right, thank you, Jodi. Now, I'd like to ask Jared, if you could fill us in on the legal struggle that I mentioned before. We've got the 15-week ban, we've got the near total ban on abortion. What's going on with that? Where's that stand right now?
Sure. So something that Jodi said that I think is important to keep in mind is the legislature has, over the last 50 years, imposed a number of restrictions on abortion care. But all of those restrictions have one thing in common, which is that they all acknowledge that abortion is legal in Arizona in many circumstances. The difference is that the total abortion ban from 1864 that the Attorney General is trying to revive and make the law of the land is in direct contrast to that, right? It does not allow abortion in almost any circumstances. And so the question legally is which law it should be enforced and which law has been either implicitly overturned or cannot be harmonized with a number of existing laws. And so the argument put forward by Planned Parenthood in that case in Pima County, right, is just that, is that these newer laws, these newer restrictions acknowledge that abortion is legal in some circumstances in Arizona, and that those newer and more specific laws should trump or override essentially this law from 150 years ago that would turn the clock way back in Arizona.
Okay, and of course we're waiting for a ruling, correct?
That's correct. We expect one sometime on or shortly after the 20th of this month.
Okay, and that's down in Pima County, of course. And how did it end up in court there?
Sure. So the original lawsuit was filed in the Superior Court in Pima County in the early 70s prior to the Roe decision. And so it has been in that court since that time when an injunction was put in place in 1973, shortly following the Roe decision. And so for 50 years, this law has been blocked by the court. And unfortunately wasn't overturned explicitly by the legislature, but again was unenforceable and still is up until the court lifts the injunction. And again, we don't know what the court's going to do, but we will find out again on the 20th, although that's probably not the end of the story there. Whichever side loses is almost certainly going to appeal that decision to a higher court. And so it'll eventually make its way to our state Supreme Court.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'd like for Eva and Dr. Taylor to take turns here and kind of talk about your personal experiences as as a provider over the years, before and after, the road or the decision that took away Roe. And, Eva, if you can tell us a little bit about your personal, I understand you've got some personal experience as a nurse, in this field as well.
I do, yes. I have personal experience as well as professional experience. Earlier this year, my husband and I had been trying to get pregnant for some time. And when we finally did, we found out about 9 weeks into the pregnancy that it was not a viable pregnancy, that it was a pregnancy that was going to end in miscarriage. And we chose to terminate the pregnancy. And a lot of that came from my professional experience. I understand that pregnancy at any stage carries more risks than abortion. It is not a health neutral event to be pregnant. And that was a simple decision for us. It was the right decision for us. And the thought of that being taken away from other families in Arizona is honestly terrifying to me, to the point that we have stopped trying to get pregnant because we are too concerned about what the future of this kind of healthcare looks like in Arizona. What I will say as far as my patients are concerned, I know that there are places still in Arizona where we can refer patients, but they're so much more limited than they used to be. And if someone only knows about certain environments where that kind of care is accessible, the nearest clinic might be 100 miles away. There are many different ways to have a thinly veiled abortion ban through restrictions and through other legislation that really makes it inaccessible to certain individuals, especially individuals who come from economic disadvantages or who don't have vehicles and other limitations like that. As far as my patients are concerned, I mean, I have had patients from 6 weeks to 20 weeks who, I'm concerned, of course, as a provider about their medical safety, who abortion was the appropriate and right choice for them. I think that what a lot of individuals miss is that it is common for a pregnancy to fail. It is common for a pregnancy to be complicated. It's common for a family to need abortion as the best and safest option available to them. And beyond that, I think that a lot of my patients are concerned because of the outcomes that are not related directly to the health of their pregnancy. We know that women who seek abortions who are not able to get them have significantly worse outcomes in a number of different areas, economically and physically. They're more likely to have to be evicted. They're more likely to experience bankruptcy. They're more likely to have chronic health issues. Their children are more likely to have developmental challenges. There are so many things that are included in these decisions that are being made that we have to consider that when a family chooses abortion, it's very likely because that was the right thing for them. And that's what I'm seeing, the concerns of my patients and about accessibility now and what that access might look like in the future is really significant. And I think it's also important to recognize that this law that is being suggested right now predates when women could vote. So that's against the will of the voters, and it alienates an entire half of our population plus. So those are the concerns that I'm seeing and that I've experienced and that I know are going to continue to be an important part of the conversation moving forward.
Now, I asked Dr. Taylor this, and of course, hopefully, Dr. Taylor, you can expand on this as well, but I asked Dr. Taylor the other day in our prep call, what questions are your patients asking you right now? And what are you telling them?
Well, the questions that I'm being asked are largely about the future. Patients who are considering getting off their birth control and becoming pregnant because I don't see patients who are pregnant. I see patients I try to prevent unwanted pregnancies. Most of the care that comes to me are people who are trying to prevent an unwanted pregnancy in the first place. But a lot of the questions that I'm having are related to what happens if something goes wrong and whether or not they're going to be at risk. It's the same questions that I had to ask myself. And it's difficult for me to be encouraging to those patients because I myself decided to stop trying. trying. So how can I tell them that the right thing for them to do is to seek a pregnancy that they want, when it was very difficult for me to have that same consideration? So I try to not be biased and to be as honest and straightforward as I can be. But I have to be honest with them that I don't know what the future holds, and that's important for them to consider when they're making that decision. I cannot tell them whether or not the healthcare that they may or may not need is going to be available to them. And I'm not going to speculate on that, because it's not safe and it's not the right thing for my patients. So I just try to be as honest and straightforward as I can and help them make the right decision for their families, like I did before, and like I'll do no matter what direction, this decision takes.
Great, thank you. Dr. Taylor, we discussed this the other day in the prep call. I mean, what was your, practice like before, or how, I guess what I'm trying to say is, what was it like before Roe, or before Dobbs, I'm sorry, and now?
So I will share that I have been an Arizonan for 13 years. And 9 of those last years I've been in practice with my Desert Star family planning. So when I arrived in 2009, that was the first large sweep of anti-abortion restrictions that were signed into law. So I personally don't know an Arizona without abortion restrictions. It has always been a new restriction every year except for one, and now we're in 2022, that I have been involved in one way or the other to make sure to incorporate into the practice of medicine to continue to allow Arizonans to receive abortion services without layering on too much additional burden to them. Unfortunately, as I said, each year, a new restriction, not just one, but slews of them in one single law, started to get to a place where some of that burden does get handed over to the person who is seeking abortion services. Because then what happens is it regulates clinics to close. When I first came to Arizona, I believe there were 20 Planned Parenthood clinic locations across the state. By the time I opened my clinic, there were only like 12 or 13. By the time I opened my clinic, I was one of 8 clinics that people could receive abortion care in Arizona. And since then, one closed, another one opened up, some closed. So just basically ability to respond to these things and keep abortion services available to people has become extremely difficult. And at this point is honestly unsustainable to be able to continue to try to get care to people during this time of uncertainty with the Dobbs decision. To be clear, the uncertainty is created by misinformation that has been spread among the leadership of our state. And because what is clear legally is abortion is still legal here. There's no way that abortion would not be legal unless the judge rules on the 20th to lift the injunction on the pre-territorial ban on abortion. But if you talk to people, many people think abortion is illegal here in Arizona. So basically what's happening is, since the decision in June, patients have continued to call. Like, people need abortion care. So they've always been calling the entire time to find out, can they have an abortion at our clinic? Just looking to us to let them know, well, if they can't have an abortion with us, where can they go? What can they do? And so that, for me, has been as kind of a understanding that people really want and need to receive care from trusted providers close to home, and that they deserve that. most providers paused after the Dobbs decision to give the state the opportunity to clarify for us, how we could safely continue to provide abortion care. And that didn't happen. And so ultimately we had to have our own individual discussions with legal teams, et cetera, like definitely something I didn't go to medical school to do. I have an MD, not a JD. But because of all of these restrictions and things, we have become very familiar with the lingo and the language and form these type of relationships that the average physician probably doesn't have with the legal system. But I will say that once there had been some movement in the in litigation, then it became very obvious that abortion is legal at the moment. And the only ban that's currently in place is the ban for people to receive abortion care due to a fetal genetic diagnosis. And that is currently the only ban in place. Otherwise, ideally, we'd be offering the full range of abortion care in our state, but because of the fear and confusion, there are providers who are not open. There are providers who are not providing the full range of care, like myself, because I'm not able to staff the clinic because our clinics are staffed by the community. Abortion providers don't provide abortion care in a vacuum. We have a team. And so the way that we talk about these things matter. The information that people receive through media outlets matter. There is no both sides to this when we're taking people's rights away. Whether or not someone would have an abortion themselves is their issue, not the next person's issue. And so we are seeing people who are so grateful to get into the clinic, who had an appointment in California the very next day. And so thankful that they didn't have to travel to get abortion care, that they were able to get abortion care at home. But so many more people did have to go to California. I have someone on my schedule right now who went to California for medical abortion and is scheduled with me today to make sure that everything went okay, because we generally do a follow-up when someone's passing a pregnancy at home to make sure that the abortion is complete. And so this is where we are. This is in Arizona that I'm sure looks very, that Jodi can't even recognize with the long work that she's been doing here. But it's the Arizona that I've known ever since I got here. I will say that I'm not surprised we're here, but it's still difficult to navigate through, because I'm in this work because I care and I want people to receive the care that they need in a just, dignified, and exceptional manner. And it's very heartbreaking to have to turn people away.
One more quick question for you. Now, I had read in a story that ran in August, I think, that you had cut back on your services and that you had lost staff because they didn't want to be prosecuted and so forth. I mean, is that accurate?
Yeah, so leading up to, although I have been very firm in my understanding that my clinic would stay open regardless of the ability to provide abortion care, not because I integrate abortion care into the full range of services I provide. Once people start to get an idea in their mind about what they perceive the future to look like, it's hard to really combat that. So leading up to the Dobbs decision, I had staff who were just so stressed out over the possibility of Roe v. Wade being overturned that they just completely left, went to seek other types of healthcare jobs. And this was something that I heard a lot of providers talk about leading up to the decision, where staff were just the uncertainty of whether they would still have a job because of this. Was too much to bear, and people were essentially quitting before they even knew what the outcome was. But I think if you were watching, it was pretty clear what the outcome was going to be. Like Maya Angelou said, when people show you who they are, believe them. And they told us the entire time, the Supreme Court told us the entire time that they were going to overturn Roe v. Wade, and then they did it. But So then we got the decision. And so there was this, it took some time for the Attorney General to even comment, right? And then when they did comment, it was that, in their mind, the law was only an issue for Pima County. So therefore, potentially, someone could prosecute in another county, et cetera. So, providing that type of misinformation really scared people. And I think it's not just the individuals who work the clinic, but it's also the people who care about them, their families, their friends. I know I have to have a very strong conviction, to provide abortion care for 21 years because people are afraid for me. People care about me. And so I think that when you have, and, as I'm a provider of color, and I intentionally hire other people of color. And so people who feel the burden of criminalization the strongest. And so I know that has been a bit more of a disproportional impact to my clinic compared to some others, because of that really strong fear that our communities of color feel just at baseline about their potential to be criminalized. And so that plays out in all areas of life. That plays out in people's personal lives, and it also plays out in people's professional lives. We can't take someone out of their skin and out of their lived experiences and circumstances with law enforcement and the legal system and think that people will just take these types of risks. Now, I personally am providing abortion care because I'm very clear that in this moment in time, it's legal. And should that change, then, I would not provide. But I'm the one talking to lawyers all day, every day. And, these people are getting secondhand information from me. So it's, the fear is real, and it's palpable. And once someone gets entrenched in that mentally, I've found that it's been difficult for people to bring themselves out of it.
All right. Well, thank you, Doctor. Jodi, you mentioned the other day that, many public policy folks, legislators are allergic to the subject of abortion, reproductive rights because of the controversy. Are these allergic people on both sides of the aisle, or can you, expand on that a little bit?
Yes, well, people in all parties can suffer from this allergy. It's absolutely true. Yeah, I think it's difficult when one party has, made an issue part of their platform and had fairly rigorous, internal party discipline around that issue. So, I was alluding to earlier, Jane Hull days, you could kind of be a pro-choice Republican. There were moderates. There has just been a steady, deliberate, inexorable move in the Republican Party towards zero tolerance for moderation of any kind, but particularly around this issue. And I know, absolutely, are there people who are against abortion from sincerely held personal beliefs? Certainly there are. Most people are somewhere in the middle, and most politicians personally are somewhere in the middle. But when politically it's suicide to even talk about something, let alone vote on something, and we've seen people lose their seats in Arizona over just that, it's absolutely extremely difficult. And then there's just the overall, when I was running a private foundation, the Foundation for Women, right? Abortion is a women's health issue, and our board members were afraid to go there because of the controversy. I think the controversy, though, is largely a paper tiger, because every poll we do shows that most people want abortion to be legal in most circumstances. And I think when we hear personal stories, and I've heard so many, I'm sure Dr. Taylor has heard thousands, you realize how complicated these decisions can be and how personal and Anyone who's been around a legislature or Congress knows laws are these blunt, clumsy instruments. They're no good in situations like abortion. So I think it's too hard and people just want to stay away from it. And I think cynically, Republicans found out a long time ago that that abortion is a wedge issue and it can drive votes. And they've used that to their benefit. But now we're in a really terrible situation in our state and in our country.
Now, I'm sure, you know, as a lobbyist that you have been, you know, you're watching the election and you're already making educated speculation of what the makeup is going to be. So, you know, how do you think it's going to turn out? What do you think the makeup's going to be like, you know, on November 9th? I think the election's on November 8th. So what's it going to be like on November 9th?
Well, they'll still be counting on November 9th, and everybody will be mad about that, I'm sure. We do have a handful of seats under the new map, you know, the new maps that are competitive. So that offers some hope. And I think, you know, folks on the Democratic side and progressive world are pretty excited about some of those competitive seats. And, you know, it starts to look in play both in the state house and in the state Senate. A couple of things with that on the plus side. This issue does seem to be driving voters on the progressive side. So we'll see that as a boost for some of the Democratic candidates in those competitive districts. And then, you know, voter turnout is a strange animal. But we think that it's going to be pushing slightly in the Democrats' direction. The countervailing element there, which people forget, there are actually anti-choice Democrats in the world, and we've got 2 of them in Arizona that made it past their primary. So that's in the balance. You know, you can't just look D's and R's. That usually is a pretty good indicator, but we've got some pro-life, as they would say, Democrats, and we just hope that they're open to a conversation, because as we've just marched through, you know, Arizona's had 25, 30, 50 years of doing it one way. I think we might be open to trying another way.
But do you think those Democrats, I mean, just like, you know, on the Republican side, I mean, if you're a moderate Republican, you know, you're probably going to vote with your party because it's going to come back and bite you. Do you think that same thing can happen on the Democratic side, or do you think that they're, you know,
well, as a lobbyist and a strategist, I think it should happen on the Democratic side. I mean, we ought to have the kind of discipline, right? It's a little looser on our side of the ballot for whatever reason. But I think what people have found, and, you know, we're in a trend, so some folks are going to just have to be courageous and lean in. But, you know, all the research around abortion care shows that, you know, everyday people, voters, are really practical about this stuff. So, you know, it's folks in the parties who want to get weird about all this. People understand it's healthcare. They understand it can be complicated, simple for some people, but that it's private in any case. And again, it should be between pregnant people, their families, and their doctors. And that's not a Democrat or Republican thing in the real world. In our crazy world around the Capitol, you know, it's this big divider, but it really does not divide everyday people. And candidates who realize that, I think, increasingly, you know, hasn't necessarily been true in the past, but increasingly can run on that to their benefit.
All right, thank you. So, Jared, can we come back to you? And, you know, when we were talking earlier, you know, one thing we really didn't mention as far as laws in Arizona was the personhood law, and there's some litigation going on with that one as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. This is Dr. Taylor spoke about confusion. I think this law was one of the reasons why there was so much confusion after the Dobbs decision. But last legislative session, to give some background, I guess first, last legislative session, a bill was passed that had two components that we challenged. The first was this personhood piece, and then the second part was the genetic abnormality reason ban that Dr. Taylor discussed. And so initially, the federal court did not block the personhood statute or personhood piece of this law, but it has since blocked it after the Dobbs decision. And so that law is currently blocked and cannot be enforced as it relates to abortion care in Arizona. And the interesting thing about this law is it's hard to, so basically what it says is anytime the word person is used in any statute in Arizona, it includes an unborn fetus at any stage of development. And in court, the Attorney General's office said in their pleadings that it's, quote, anybody's guess what this law means. That's absurd. The legislature should not be passing laws that the chief law enforcement officer in the state is unable to say what it means. And so this led to confusion, rightfully so. People didn't know what this law meant and how it could be applied in the context of abortion care. And so I think this is one example of many where our legislature for years have passed these laws that really make no sense medically, logically in the case of this law, and it just sows confusion among everybody. Again, the good news, as I said, is that the federal court has now blocked that law, so it cannot be enforceable as it relates to abortion care. The other piece of that law, the genetic abnormality ban, was initially blocked, and we are fighting to have it blocked again. When it was initially blocked, the court did so for two reasons. One was Roe v. Wade, which is no longer a good reason. But the second reason that the court blocked the law was that law was also unconstitutionally vague, meaning that it was unconstitutionally confusing and didn't provide notice about what precisely was criminalized. And so we are re-urging the court to block that law or enjoin that law under that reason, the reason that's unconstitutionally vague.
And we had talked a little bit earlier about, there's been some talk about, one of the things that could be done in the future legally, or at least passing legislation, is passing a law that would make it illegal to cross state lines to get an abortion. Now, just as a layman sitting here, it just doesn't make sense that could happen. But our legislature, if they got the votes, they can do it. So legally, what's the problems with that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of problems with that. I think you correctly noted that our legislature doesn't necessarily care that a bill is unconstitutional. They will still pass it. Just this last week, a clearly unconstitutional law about recording police officers was blocked. The legislature was warned that law was unconstitutional, and they passed it anyway, and the governor signed it. And so I don't think that the fact that criminalizing travel would have constitutional problems is enough to stop our legislature from trying to pass a law like that. In fact, that was that fear that a prosecutor would prosecute a patient, right, for traveling out of state to seek abortion care, was one of the concerns with the personhood law, because that law was so broad that a cunning prosecutor might try to use it to in conjunction with, say, a kidnapping law to criminalize leaving the state to seek abortion care. And so this is a real fear in Arizona. But like I said, if that were to pass, I would suspect that either the ACLU of Arizona or other organizations would litigate on that issue. But I think, the broader problem here is, we will continue to fight for in the courts for protecting the right to abortion in Arizona. But there's particularly now that the Roe decision has been overturned, it's much harder to fight these battles. And so that's why voting can be so important. You mentioned some of the House races, but there are also state and local races that are very, very important. So on the state level, right, the AG's race and the governor's race are extremely important as it relates to access to abortion care in Arizona. The Maricopa County Attorney's race, although that race doesn't necessarily garner the sort of attention that some of these state races garners, is hugely important. The current county attorney, Rachel Mitchell, has made it clear that she will prosecute both patients and doctors for seeking abortion care. And so her challenger has said that she will not. And so, these races are very, very important as it relates to abortion care in Arizona.
Now, I know prosecutors do have, discretion, but, can a prosecutor just say, I'm not going to do that because, for moral reasons?
Yes. And I want to say yes, full stop, because the current county attorney in Maricopa has attempted to make this issue much more complicated than it is. Prosecutors have discretion to file or to not file charges. They have discretion to dismiss charges. They have discretion to not prosecute when they feel that it is not in the interest of justice. And if you believe that it is not in the interest of justice to criminally prosecute doctors and patients for their abortion decisions, that is well within your purview as a prosecutor. And to suggest that prosecutors don't exercise that discretion every single day is frankly a lie. And I think it's a dangerous lie coming from the current county attorney who has attempted to sort of act as if prosecutors simply have to follow the law regardless of what the law says.
Thank you, Jared. Now we got about 12 minutes left and a few more topics I want to touch on before we go. So, but I want to throw a question out there from the audience, and Eva, if you can address it, and then Dr. Taylor briefly. Is there a place for restrictions on any type of healthcare decision? And is there a place for restrictions on abortion?
Well, when it comes to restrictions on any type of healthcare decision, sure. That's a much larger question that's just so open to interpretation that it's a little bit of a can of worms. Speaking to my specialty when it comes to abortion, I know that when people talk about, and I think that probably what the point is here is how late into pregnancies these procedures are taking place. But I also think that when it comes to my perspective on it and my view as someone who is trying to become a legislator here in Arizona, I have to operate off of the reality of the situations and not off of hypotheticals that make people uncomfortable. Third trimester abortions, elective third trimester abortions aren't occurring in the state. So I'm not going to write legislation or try to write or pass or vote on legislation for impossible scenarios that aren't occurring. I think that we need to be really practical about looking at what's actually happening in Arizona and be thinking about our legislation in those realistic terms. So as far as do I think that the legislature should be putting bans on abortion? No, I don't think that there is a place for bans on abortion in Arizona, certainly not at this time when we're already talking about only 20 weeks previously and 15 weeks now. There's no stage of a pregnancy where there might not be a life-threatening emergency. That doesn't exist. So that's the real concern for someone like me as a medical professional. And if there's no guaranteed timing of when you're going to find out that something is terribly wrong with the fetus as well, malformed or organs growing outside the body, or other very, very serious and complications, abnormalities that are not compatible with life outside the womb, or of course, very serious problems with the mother's health. And there's not a safe point in pregnancy. And so I'm not going to write legislation that puts my patients at risk. And I think that that certainly we can have conversations about morality and about individual liberties and all of those things. But when it comes to outright bans, that's bad legislation. It's not what the people of Arizona want. And that's who I report to.
Thank you, Eva. And Dr. Taylor, that question came through the Q&A. There's two places. There's a chat and a Q&A. So
no, I understand. So I appreciate the expansion that Eva made, but the answer kind of made an assumption about what the question was saying. It wasn't exactly the question. So I just like to answer the questions that are asked. And so I try not to make assumptions about what people are trying to ask. But I will say that, especially related to restrictions in healthcare, I have been a physician for 21 years, and the entire time that I've been a physician, I've been an abortion provider. And in my 21 years of providing healthcare, I have not been involved in any type of healthcare that is restricted the way abortion care is restricted. So much so that you have lay people who will say to me that abortion is not healthcare, because it's become so political and ideological that there are lay people who don't understand that abortion care is an actual health care practice. And so in medicine, the only real restrictions around healthcare is about who is qualified to provide a certain type of care. So I am an obstetrician gynecologist. I can't go do your knee replacement. But, so those are the types of restrictions that governing boards have. We have medical boards, we have independent boards of the different types of doctors that exist. We have nursing boards. So there are these standards that are created that do with the goal of actually keeping people safe when they access healthcare. But what we don't see are these types of limitations. Like, for example, Arizona is a very large state. There's been a push to increase access to telemedicine for people in rural Arizona. However, preemptively, there was a law that bans telemedicine for the use of medical abortion, while also the state has been pushing to expand telemedicine in general for all of its citizens, especially during the COVID pandemic. So you see the difference here. So ideally, restrictions in medicine are really about scope of practice, that people actually have to have experience in and licensing to do the things that they claim that they can do for people's health. But traditionally, it hasn't been, traditionally abortion care is the place where all of these other different types of special restrictions have been allowed to be enforced that do not add to the safety of people seeking health care. So for example, when the Food and Drug Administration lifted the in-person requirement for someone to take mifepristone, the first pill for a medical abortion, people all over the country were able to innovate. They were able, during a pandemic where I personally was trying to limit the number of people in my clinic, I personally have still not gotten COVID, thankfully. When I'm thinking about trying to decrease the number of people in my clinic, the number of times someone has to come through the door and expose myself and my staff, other states were able to use telemedicine to do a consultation and then mail people their abortion pills. We weren't able to do that in Arizona because we have a ban on telemedicine. We have an in-person physician-only requirement to administer mifepristone. So in the throes of our COVID pandemic at its worst in this state, we weren't even able to keep people safe because of these unreasonable restrictions on abortion in a state where telemedicine use is on the rise for any other reason someone would seek medical care. So I think Eva, mentioned the other piece that may have been an undercurrent of the reason that question was answered. But I also hope that people understand that, the restrictions on abortion are special. This is just not something that happens in healthcare in general.
Great, thank you, Dr. Taylor. So Jodi, what are the prospects of a ballot initiative, and what form would that take, and what would it take to pass it?
It would take a whole lot of money to pass it. Is what it would take. It has been hard in the last several years, extremely difficult, and I'll talk about that in a second, to for citizens to get referrals on the ballot. The legislature does not like the fact that Arizona citizens can go to the ballot and legislate by themselves. So every year we see more and more restrictions around those requirements, those legal requirements, and they are now just unbelievably hard to comply with. The Fair Elections initiative gathered, I think, close to twice the number of signatures that they would have needed, and they still couldn't qualify because entire sheets are discounted because someone went outside the lines with their signature, and I'm not making that up, or the margins were 1/8 of an inch off, and I'm not making that one up either. So it is really, really difficult, just logistically and time, money, people, to get anything on the ballot. Then with abortion as an issue, it's a tough one to write a ballot initiative for. What do you want to do? You want to, have it completely open. There's real questions about including, language like viability, which other states have tried to do, kind of replicate the Roe decision. That is an admission by the people that a state has an interest at all in a pregnancy. So, other people really don't want to do that. So it's going to be hard to get advocates and constituents to agree on language. And then that's going to have to be language that a majority of Arizonans feel willing to vote for. So there's that analysis that has to overlay it. Like, in our progressive world, we have really black and white positions because, we have to include every contingency. That's why laws are, really, really difficult in this area of healthcare, because there's so many permutations. So it would be wonderful to have a constitutional amendment that would protect our rights. That would be a lot more than we have right now. What form that takes and the resources that we would have to marshal are really substantial. There's other routes. They're a little less proven, but you could go the decriminalization route. That can happen via statute, but of course you'd have to have a friendly legislature. So it is possible and may actually happen. How likely, I don't know. It's a steep hill. People should understand that it's not like, oh, we'll see that next year and we can sign it and it'll go on the ballot. Like, it is very hard. It's going to be thousands of people rolling up their sleeves to make it happen if it happens.
All right, great. And so we are at 9 o'clock at the end of our hour, and I'm sure you folks would like to keep talking, but talking about this, but we have to end this now. And I just want to thank NARAL for sponsoring this. Thank our panelists for being here, and all your thoughts on this, and also thank our audience. So have a good day, and thank you for joining us. Good night and goodbye.